Windows web design. Alliance for the Brave, serving and empowering those who serve our great country in the line of duty. Tune in, join in, and plug in with us around the globe. Welcome to Alliance for the Brave.
In the air everywhere across America, you're listening to Alliance for the Brave, where we bring education, information, and communication to today's veterans, active duty military, first responders, and God bless the medical responders and American patriots who will join us. I'm Jim Blythe, U.S. Navy veteran, and your host and anchor. I'm here on a very special weekend with a very special friend. I'd like to introduce you to U.S. Navy Captain Retired Marc Liebman. Marc, welcome aboard, buddy.
Hey, thanks for having me, and it's an honor to be here on this weekend.
I got to tell you, I met you, I think 2 or 3 or 4 years ago at a Navy League deal, and you were talking about your book, and I got your books, and I called you up and I said, Captain, these are not fiction. I was there on the Oriskany. I saw this. You were there at the same time I was, and my God, that was a good book. And that was your Cherubs 2, I think I read.
Yeah,
Loved it.
Because you were in an H2 dead and an HC1 on what we refer to colloquially as the toasted O.
Yeah. And
by the way, for that's Navy slang for the USS Oriskany, and it refers to the horrendous fire it had.
Yeah. Matter of fact, we're here at Memorial Day, so I lost, I think, 6 pilots in that fire in 1966. Now, I was on board in 1967. I got there right before John McCain did. I met McCain. I thought he was a great guy. Other people had different opinions of him. But I got to tell you, I was there with VA 163 and 67, and I was there with VA 163 and 68, 69 on the Hancock, and I didn't know till I read your books, Cherubs 2 and Big Mother 40, I didn't know what you guys were doing. I know my helicopter rescue, we did the plane guard, and I had another good friend that was with HC7. I didn't know what you guys did, and you were an integral part of what happened, and some of the things was so amazing to read in your book, and you were a national best-selling author. So you were a Navy captain, you had another career, and now you're a national best-selling. You are the Tom Clancy of the Navy, buddy. I got to tell you that.
I haven't reached Tom Clancy status, but we're working on it.
We're working.
The success has been somewhat gratifying, and when you read the positive comments on all my books, it's always gratifying. And one of the things I try to do is I try to put the reader in the time and during the events, and in some cases, like in Big Mother 40 and some of the others, literally in the cockpit. And so I want to talk about, since this is Memorial Day, we want to transition a little bit to the guys who went way before us.
Yeah.
So let me kind of do this. So not only have I learned how to put people in the cockpit in terms of what readership or readers of one of my books, but in my Age of Sail novel, which takes place during the American Revolution, I had to learn a whole new culture, a whole new time, and literally be able to put people on the quarterdeck and on the gun deck of ships in the 1770s during the American Revolution. And both the U.S. Navy, or actually the Continental Navy, which is totally different than the Royal Navy, obviously the U.S. Navy, and the Royal Navy. So it was that was an interesting thing, but I learned so much about the people who went before to make what enabled me to be successful later on in the U.S. Navy.
Well, you're talking about John Paul Jones, and you're talking about a time and a period that is almost incomprehensible, even if you served on a ship, to be what it would have been on one of those sailing ships. And the way you wrote the Josh Heyman series, who is the hero of your Vietnam and those books, I can't wait to read it. Tell me a little bit about this sail series and about the 2 men that you wrote about, the Englishman and the Continental Navy. I think this has got to be fantastic.
Well, so the good news is it came out in August of last year, I guess, and by October it was already an Amazon bestseller, which surprised the heck out of me and surprised my publisher, but we were both ecstatic about it. The book came about over a dinner where my wife and I were having dinner with the publisher and our editor, and he's asked me if I ever thought about writing a book called Around the Age of Sail, because he knew I was a fan of Horatio Hornblower and C.S. Forrester and that.
Oh, yeah.
So immediately I said yes. It took me about 2 nanoseconds to agree to it, and then we started talking about it. And I was literally consumed by it. So by 3 or 4 days later, I sent him the outlines of the first, what I thought was going to be a 3-book series. It's going to be a 7-book series. So that was the first thing. And he asked me how long did I think it would take to write, and I said, about 6 months. Boy, was that a mistake. It took me a year to write it, most of which was due to the research required, because think about this. In 1775, 1776, when the book starts, and I'll talk more about what the plot's about or what the series is about in a second, but there was no internet. There was no electricity. You didn't have running water. There were no cars, airplanes, trains, buses, whatever, that stuff, all that stuff. You couldn't run down the street to the nearest 7-Eleven to get gas or to a supermarket. It just didn't exist. And correspondence, when you want to deal with somebody, how'd you do it? Well, you sent it by letter. Well, in the 13 colonies, which is what we were before the United States, there was the beginnings of Royal Mail, but it was primarily along the major coastal cities. And, oh, by the way, if you want to communicate with somebody in London from, let's say, New York or Charleston, South Carolina, the letter would take 4 to 5 weeks to get there. So the pace of things was a lot slower. You didn't have central heating, so houses were all heated by fireplaces, or you didn't heat them at all. We didn't have potable water. So what did you drink? What did you eat? Always had to learn all those kinds of things. By the way, the answer to the question about what do you drink, because water is considered dangerous, was beer. People brewed beer in their homes, or they bought it from the local beer maker, and it was typically about 2% alcohol. The other thing they drank was wine, again, because it was available and it wouldn't make.
And the alcohol purified the beverage, so that's how you got your water. I'm mad. No wonder Navy grog was so popular back then.
Right. So grog was essentially water distilled, not distilled, with a little bit of rum and some lemon or lime juice squeezed in it. So the book is about starts early in the American Revolution, and it's about 2 midshipmen, one in the Continental Navy and one in the Royal Navy. So they start as mortal enemies, and then they meet about partway through the book, and they become friends because they're essentially the same age. They have similar backgrounds, and then the Royal Navy captain is paroled or sent back to England, and now they're mortal enemies again. So this series is going to go from the American Revolution through the War of 1812. So at times they're going to be allies, at times they're going to be friends and allies, I guess, and other times they're going to be enemies again. And so it's kind of interesting. The American is born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina. And I picked Charleston because everybody talks about New Englanders. And the other reason I focused on the Continental Navy was because all the great books written by Patrick O'Brien and Horatio Hornblower and Alexander Kant, focus on the Royal Navy during the Napoleonic Wars. So we're going to start in 1775, and we're going to do 3 books, actually 3.5 books on the American Revolution, because there's just so much about it. And then the next one will be about the Quasi War, then the war against the Barbary Pirates, and the final one will be take place during the War of 1812. So it's it's been fascinating. The second book in the series comes out hopefully sometime late this summer, and then I'll be pumping them out probably one every 8 to 10 months after that.
How do you do that kind of research? Do you go back to those who wrote about these, like Horatio Hornblower, before you and reread their material? How do you get that research to really understand? Because having read your other books, you and I were there. You were spot on, but you weren't there in 1700s.
Yeah, so well, sometimes I think I am, but or was, but because my body feels like it. But anyway, so there's lots of places, and strangely enough, the place I start quite often with is Wikipedia, because you could type in something like a question, and you get some information on Wikipedia. And at the bottom of the Wikipedia pages, there's always a bunch of sources, and you just keep digging. A lot of the stuff got, or our research came from the Navy's Military Heritage and Navy Heritage Command, I think is what it's called now. And they have a section called Documents from the Naval Documents from the American Revolution, and it's broken up into a bunch of different categories. And you can search it and you can find stuff. So I found John Paul Jones's original letter to a friend in France, in which he uses the term "in harm's way." Now, most people when they use it. In fact, it's in the section, or the paragraph is in the initial part of the book. But most people use it incorrectly, because where Jones was is he was frustrated. He had come off Bonhomme-Richard. They had defeated Serapis. They had, and he didn't have a command, and he had been promised a command of a ship called Alliance, and I'll talk about Alliance in a second. He was waiting for a ship to become a captain so he could go do his thing again. And he was writing in frustration to this French friend who was had good connections within, I'll call it the Naval Ministry of France. Where's my ship is basically what he's saying, because give me, what the statement says is, give me a fast ship, for I intend to sail it in harm's way. And if you read just that part, you think, oh my goodness, he's eager to get going. But yes, when you read the sentences before that and after that, you can sense his frustration. So another thing I found was the log on USS Ranger, which was one of his commands. I found other documents. For example, I found letters between John Adams, who at the time was the head of the Marine Committee in the Continental Congress, and between he and Joseph Hughes and Stephen Hopkins, who was also on the Marine Committee. There's 5 men on it. And what the discussion was about was a debate on how they selected captains. Joseph Hughes was adamant that we pick captains based on their ability as naval officers and their ability to fight a ship. On the other hand, John Adams and Stephen Hopkins, who are from New England, Boston and Providence, they wanted to appoint their friends who are merchant ship captains. And you can see letters back and forth arguing about this. And then there's another one by John Paul Jones, who he's literally writing to a friend after he is back in the colonies. It's after his failure to get Alliance, and that's a whole other story. But he's there to help select captains, and he says, look, what really counts is performance, and he defines performance as the man's ability to sail a ship, his ability to his ability, tactics, leadership. It's leadership, seamanship, tactics, and everything else is claptrap. And he literally uses those words.
Wow. Now, you got to be thinking, how long was one of those sailing ships? 150, 200 feet, 300 feet?
Big. So a typical frigate, and the Royal Navy system are rating frigates. You would start with 6 raters going up to first raters, but a 5th or 6th rate frigate had somewhere between 24 and 36 guns, and a big one was about 140 feet long, 35 feet wide, roughly, and about 700 tons. So it was not really big. If you have ever visited the USS Constitution or Constellation in Boston or Baltimore, you'll see that they're not much bigger than that. And the Constitution was considered a large, quote, heavy frigate. And so the crews, you had 200 roughly men packed into this ship.
Now, what kind of speeds did they achieve as a four-rigger or as a
three-masted full
yeah.
ship? A really fast frigate, and this is another interesting thing, a really fast one would get to about 10 knots. Most of the time, they cruised about 5 or 6 knots, and under full sail, without any weed on the bottom, you probably get to 7 or 8 knots. But the hull speeds were typically around 10 knots.
Oh, okay. All right. Hey, Mark, we got to go to a commercial break. I'm so involved in what you're talking about, I'm forgetting where we are. So this is Jim Blythe with Captain Marc Liebman. We're talking about books and Raiders of the Scottish Coast. We're talking about Memorial Day. Stand by and stay with us. This is Alliance for the Brave. Thank you for being on board. We really appreciate that. You were saying you want to talk about what? Mark, I got distracted.
Okay, so a lot of people think the U.S. Navy began during the American Revolution, and that's just simply not true. It was known as the Continental Navy, along with the Continental Army. And in 1783, after the war was essentially won, we had signed a peace treaty. The Continental Army and the Continental Navy were dissolved. They sold off of the ships. The men who were in the Continental Army went back into the local militias. We'll call them state militias at that time. And essentially the United States was defenseless. And that lasted until 1794. And then the Navy Act of March, I think it's 23rd if I remember correctly, but March of 1794, Congress creates the United States Navy. At the time, and one of the driving forces behind that sudden change from being defenseless to creating an army and a navy was two things. One is we owed the French more than a few francs, and the Barbary pirates were beginning to raise their ugly head in the Mediterranean. And by the late 1790s, about 30% of the U.S. budget, the federal budget, was spent on tribute to the Barbary states on the northern littoral of basically North Africa, around what we now know as Libya, Algeria, and Tunisia. And so the U.S. government said, no more of this, the famous statement, millions for defense, but not 1 cent more for tribute. But that came actually after the turn of the century, I guess. So there was a 9-year period where the U.S. literally had no Army or Navy. The modern U.S. Navy was created in 1794, and the true father of it is a gentleman by the name of John Barry, who was a captain during the American Revolution, and he was tasked by George Washington to create a new U.S. Navy. And what's interesting is Barry went back to a lot of his friends and the guys he knew were really good from the American Revolution, and out of that they began to recruit their friends, and you start seeing names like Decatur, Preble, Bainbridge, et cetera, the real heroes of the growth of the U.S. Navy from 1794 to the end of the War of 1812. But these are the guys that created the traditions and the culture of the Navy that we know and love today.
I'll tell you what, let's do. We're going to be coming back from our commercial break for broadcast radio. I'm going to ask you to repeat that so that people know how the Navy got started, because everybody, like you say, thinks it got started during the Revolution. So we'll come back and we'll talk about that. Also, I want to talk about, again, Memorial Day as we progress through this program, because we're talking about history, the history of the United States Navy with Marc Liebman, Captain, U.S. Navy, 26 years. 26 years. And you ain't that old, man. All right, we're going to be right back as we return to broadcasting. Hang with us. Thank you, Facebook, for staying with us on Alliance for the Brave.
You're listening to Alliance for the Brave, honoring, serving, and empowering those who serve our great country in the line of duty. Today's program is presented by Gear Services Web Design. Learn more about our mission and how you can plug in with us at allianceforthebrave.com. Now, back to the conversation.
Okay, hang with me. Let's go. All right, welcome back. You got Jim Blythe, a U.S. Navy veteran. I love history. And, of course, I lived through some of the history. I lived through the Vietnam War and the Navy, and I love the Navy. My grandfather was career Navy. My father was in the Navy. I am third-generation Navy, and this is something that, to me, is a lot of fun, especially having been at sea most of my 4 years. So I've got Captain Marc Liebman, author of the great series, the Josh Heyman series, Cherubs 2, Big Mother 40, and a new series coming out, the Sail series. Mark, we were talking on the break about how the Navy really got started, when it got started. So would you repeat that as we're going back through talking about the history of the U.S. Navy, especially as it relates today to Memorial Day?
Okay, so a lot of people think the U.S. Navy started during the American Revolution. That's just simply not true. What happened in the American Revolution was the Continental Congress created an organization called the Continental Navy. And the Continental Navy served until 1783, at which point it was disbanded, along with, by the way, the Continental Army. So the United States was essentially defenseless, and it remained so until 1794, when the Navy Act was passed in March of 1794, and in it authorized the creation of what we now know as the U.S. Navy. And the true father, the guy who then created this new organization and got people to become in as leaders and also begin recruiting, was a gentleman by the name of John Barry, who was a captain during the American Revolution. He was a captain of the ship called Alliance, a frigate called Alliance, and was very, very successful. And so the people that Barry brought in and recruited to join this nascent new organization, the U.S. Navy, were men like the names of Decatur, Preble, Bainbridge. There's a whole host of them that led the U.S. Navy in the wars against the Barbary Pirates, wars against the Quasi-War against the French in 1798, and then again in the War of 1812. And the spirit and the traditions that they brought with them and that they created is what we know today. And these are the guys who literally started the organization, and these are the guys who we need to also remember, as well as those who of my generation and the generations before us. But the original Continental Navy, again, died in 1783. When I say died, it was disbanded. They sold off the ships, they paid out everybody off, and we had no Navy or Army.
Mark, going back, though, in this period of history, and you did so much research, your new sales series that you're talking about, what is the name, the Raiders of the Scottish Coast? What is that significant of that? Where do we come from with that one?
Okay, so when I was beginning to write it and do the outline, I came up with what I call working titles. And I'm a great fan of John Paul Jones, and if you know your history, he conducted a raid at Whitehaven in Scotland, which was his hometown, and it was not exactly a tactical success. But it did send a message to the Brits that we could attack them anywhere in their home country as well as anywhere in the world. And if nothing else, that was the message that was delivered. So strategically, it was a tremendous success. So what I want to do in this book is I want to remind everybody of this. And so the title came Raider of the Scottish Coast. And in the book, there are raids in the Scottish coast, which in this case are tactically successful because it's my hero, my book. But it also creates a conflict on the crew and some other things. So the series, the working titles, the next book is Carronade. It comes from the cannon type that was made by a company in Scotland called Carron Industries. And it basically was a short, fat gun that fired a very large projectile very slowly. The advantage was...
Let me ask you a question. How far did that projectile go? Are you talking about 100 yards, 200 yards?
Well, that's a very good question, Jim. So a carronade ball had an effective range of 200 to 300 yards, 400 on a really good day with really good powder. Whereas an 18-pounder or 24-pounder long gun had an effective range out to 1,000 yards or so.
Wow. All right. Hey, we're going to be taking a break here in just a second. So this is Jim Blythe with Marc Liebman. We'll be right back after these words from all of our partners. This is Alliance for the Brave. We're having too much fun, so stay with us. Enjoy this trip back in history as we're talking about the start of the U.S. Navy. So this is great. Hang with us. If you got questions, send it to my wife, Diane, on Facebook. We'll answer them. Thank you for being on board, and thank you for being part of Alliance for the Brave.
What they ate. Yeah, I'm focused on him. And
yeah, and y'all are off to the races, and I'm just like, okay, I just have to bang on.
Scared us half to death. Okay, this is great. Now,
do this again.
huh?
We can do this again. This is so fascinating because one of the things
So the year they commissioned the Army and the Navy back in was 92?
1794, the Army and Navy Acts were created. I've got I can look up on my laptop if you want the actual dates.
No, I just want the year.
Yeah, 1790. Actually, they were both passed in March 1794.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, when we come back, I'm going to reintroduce you and talk about your sea service a little bit and how that relates to your knowledge of what it's like in the sea and then your research. So I'm going to bring you back to that to talk about what you were wanting to talk about.
Okay, so make it a really general question because I'm going to give you an answer if that's actually funny.
Okay.
And it's also the truth.
Okay. All right. So let's go over that. I'm just having too much fun, Mark. I hope you are.
Yeah, I'm enjoying the hell out of this.
Okay. Yeah, we need to do this more often. And I got to get this. Now, my personal question, and then Facebook, thank you for being with us on Facebook. Were the original American Navy ship captains and sailors trained under British traditions?
No.
Okay.
So the U.S. Navy let's start with the Continental Navy. We adopted pretty much what the Royal Navy did, almost in toto. There are a couple of things, one of which is we had terms of enlistments that were a year, which caused all kinds of problems because at the end of the year you had to pay them off, and then those who wanted to leave would leave, so you had a lot of turnover. We adopted the Articles of War, which was the UCMJ of the day, Uniform Code.
Today's program is brought to you by Gear Services Web Design. Visit us on Facebook or online at allianceforthebrave.com. And now, back to Alliance for the Brave.
Welcome back, and you're on board with Jim Blythe. We're talking with Captain Marc Liebman, United States Navy retired helicopter pilot, combat veteran, Vietnam veteran, Desert Shield veteran. You flew helicopters in combat, not only SAR missions, but probably insertion missions and things like that. Some of the things you can't talk about, right?
Well, I could talk about them more or less, but yeah, we did a lot of interesting things. Some of it was a lot of fun. We flew things like what we call the Holy Helo mission, which was to carry chaplains from ship to ship on Sundays, or when we had other tasking to do that. We did a lot of personnel transfers. We carried the media around to take pictures of ships, and it was always interesting to watch them sit at the edge of a helicopter.
I was so thrilled to read your books because I was there. My last tour was with a helicopter rescue unit, so you brought it to life because you had lived through it. Unless you have been at sea on an aircraft carrier, especially in 24-hour flight combat flight operations, you cannot fathom, you cannot imagine what it is. So when I read your books, I went, wow, this man's been there. But now we're talking about a period of history, and that is so different from what we had. You're talking about a 140-foot ship that fired guns that maybe, on a good day, 1,000 yards. Tell me some of the other things that were so much different about that.
Okay, so imagine a ship in which you can only shoot out the sides. Okay.
Yeah.
And also imagine that you're on a sailing ship and you can't sail into the wind. In fact, a square rigger, basically you can sail about 45 on a good day with a really good ship to the wind line. So that means there's about a 90-degree segment of the ocean where you can't sail into. So it required maneuvering. Then the other interesting thing about this is that you had to sail the ship as well as fight the ship. And you rarely had enough people to do both. So what you would do is if you're fighting with, let's say, the port side guns, and then the starboard gun crews would help handle the braces and yards and sheets that control the sails themselves. So that was one of the other interesting things. The other thing that strikes you about this is the pace in which an action happened, but the difference also the difference of tactics between the U.S. Navy or the Continental Navy and the Royal Navy. The Royal Navy was focused on getting your ship alongside the other ship and using rate of fire at close range into the hull to discourage or force the other crew to quit, either through casualties or you've demasted it or whatever. Well, when you're sailing ships that are converted merchant ships, they're not purpose-built as a warship, that kind of warfare isn't going to work because you're going to get the crap shot out of you, as what happened with John Paul Jones and Serapis and Bonhomme Richard. So the French had been playing around with this style called melee, which is M-E-L-accent-aigu-E, which is essentially a dogfight between sailing ships. What it does is the captain who can maneuver the ship best to get a crossing shot where he's crossing either the stern or the bow, where the other ship is essentially defenseless, will ultimately win the fight. And so that's one of the things I highlighted in this Jaco Jacinto Age of Sail series, is the Continental Navy style of fighting versus the Royal Navy style of fighting. So that leads you to this whole conversation of our discussion about technology and guns. And so, for example, the United States had some pretty interesting shipbuilders, and they were experienced. They were not novices at this because by the time the war broke out, the U.S. shipyards, or the shipyards of the 13 colonies, were building about a third to a half, depending on whose estimate you read, of the ships in the British merchant fleet. So we could build ships. We just had not built many warships, although at the time we were starting to get contracts, or U.S. shipyards in the colonies were starting to get contracts from the Royal Navy to build small frigates. Why? Well, number one, we had the capacity. Number two, we had a much, well, I'll use the word in those days, unlimited supply of wood, primarily oak and hardwoods, as well as pine to use in the ships. So that leads us to an interesting conversation about technology, and there's this chap by the name of Joshua Humphreys, who is a shipbuilder. He's known for designing the Constitution, and then the 6 frigates that were that class, but he also had some other interesting innovations. He's the first guy to actually use what we would call now layered armor. And what he did is he sandwiched oak, which is a hardwood, sandwiched pine, which is a softwood, between 2 harder layers of oak. So what happens is when the side of the ship is hit with a cannonball, the pine compresses, absorbs a lot of the impact. So the first layer of oak stops it, the pine compresses, the second layer of oak keeps it from penetrating, and voila, what happens? The cannonball drops into the ocean, hence the term old Ironsides.
Yeah, that was the term old Ironsides, because, and those were unbelievable. And again, what you're talking about is a 140-foot ship with cannon trying to maneuver, and you've got a limited, as a masted ship, you got a lot of limited, but also the men aboard. That had to be a very, very difficult life, Captain.
Yes, it was. Discipline was harsh. If you ever read the Royal Navy's Articles of War, which we adopted, pretty much everything was punishable by death. And by death, that meant hanging or a firing squad. So you were crammed into this small ship. The food was actually, for the time, okay, but it was boring. It was salt meats, salt beef, salt pork. You had dried vegetables like peas that they served, and oatmeal was served for breakfast. But you didn't have fresh fruits and vegetables, except they generally had limes on board to squeeze into the rum so you get vitamin C to combat scurvy. That was until a Dutch physician discovered that beer also helped prevent scurvy.
So that's why the term limeys, because they were squeezing the lime, because if you don't get vitamin C over a period of time, what, weeks, several weeks?
Within 2 weeks, you started getting scurvy, and scurvy is very debilitating. So let's talk about this from a societal perspective. So you sign on to a ship. The real reason you sign on to a ship is not because of the wages and the fact that they had a doctor on board, so theoretically you had medical care. But if you were an officer, you were standing on the quarterdeck, which meant you were out exposed to musket fire and cannonballs. But the real lure was prize money, and you could literally earn generational wealth if your ship captured prizes. And I go into a lot of this in this book, as also at carronade, people, literally family fortunes were made during this era through prize money. It's one of the reasons why the U.S. Or the colonies started issuing letters of credit. There were like 2,000 of these things issued, and they captured somewhere around 12 to 15% of the British merchant fleet. And that money was used to, obviously went into people's pockets, but the Continental Congress took 10% off the top if it was brought into a U.S. port, and it helped fund the Continental Navy. But the other significant thing about this is that this money was paid in English pounds or Dutch guilders or Spanish dollars, because the Continental dollar was essentially worthless. So guys would get coins, and they literally were family fortunes. The former Secretary of the Navy's family fortune was literally started during the American Revolution on a privateer by the name of Fair American. It was the most effective privateer ever of that period, and it captured 45 British ships. So an enormous amount of money was made by the family, or actually by through prize money, which was then, since his ancestor was an officer on this, he got a portion of it.
And so what you're really, we use the term privateer, you're kind of making it neat, because really what they were was a pirate. It was
war for fun and profit.
Yeah, war for fun and profit. Go out there and shoot somebody to pieces and capture. Were a lot of those, because were Spanish galleons still in the Caribbean at that time?
No, the Spanish Navy was pretty much out of the picture during the American Revolution. Now, you have to understand, the United States was allied with the Dutch, which is now an independent country, the French, and the Spanish. And the Spanish had possessions in South America and Central America, and a few islands. The French had a lot of islands in the Caribbean. The American Revolution literally started what I refer to, and a lot of historians are now beginning to realize, the second global war ever fought. The first was the 7 Years' War, which the French were soundly defeated. So the American Revolution took place not only in the continent of North America, but all over the Caribbean, in Central America, in South America, and in this far-off place called India, where the British and the French were fighting literally on the ground on the east coast of India over territory. Now, when the British finally gave up the ghost after Yorktown, which was October 1791, the war did not end. A lot of historians say, oh yeah, Yorktown was done, the war is over. Au contraire, it was kept going in the South, and the southern colonies, primarily South Carolina and Georgia, and it was not until 1782 that Savannah, Georgia was liberated, and then in December of 1782, Charleston, South Carolina was finally liberated. The British didn't leave New York until 1784, well after the treaty was signed.
Wow, I didn't know that. I did not know that. So that, that was an amazing fact of history, but this was a terribly, terribly different world, a different culture. I mean, communication, 4 to 6 weeks back to
via letter.
Yeah, via letter, and going back and forth. All of the things that we've learned about what happened, all of those who went before us, the John Paul Jones, the men that you mentioned that were the start of the Navy, the start of the Marine Corps. Where did the Marine Corps came from? They were the riflemen, the troops, the shock troops that were on the ships. That's where the Marine Corps came from.
So here's another interesting thing. The first, what the Marines would call amphibious operation of the United States Marine Corps took place in March of 1775, when John Paul Jones was part of a small fleet, 5 ships that went down to Nassau to take the forts in Nassau to hopefully capture some gunpowder, which was desperately needed by the colonies. And so the first Marine amphibious landing was to put troops ashore, and there were U.S. Marines on board each of the 5 ships in the squadron. And so the U.S. Marine Corps could literally date its history to that. But again, they were not known as U.S. Marines. They were known as Continental Marines. Oh. And then the Marine Corps was then refounded when the U.S. Navy was refounded. Now, I'm sure that the Marines in the audience will take issue with what I just said, but as a fact of the matter, the guys in dark green, we refer to as the dark side, Y'all,
And they refer to us, in not so good terms either.
correct. We're known as squids, but that's okay. And we call them jarheads. But the point is that there was this 9-year gap, but the Marines literally made their first amphibious landing in 1775.
Okay, Mark, I am having so much fun, and I enjoyed your first 2 books so much. And where can people go to get copies of your books? Where can they go to get this copy of Raiders of the Scottish Coast? It's on Amazon?
Yep. All my books are on Amazon. So you can just click on the book and you can order an electronic copy, and it's in 3 or 4 different electronic formats. You can get a paper copy, and finally, the first audiobook which is Big Mother 40 is now available as an audiobook, I should say. The second book in the series, or the second audiobook, I believe will be Cherubs 2. It'll be out sometime later this year. So ultimately, all my books will be available in audiobook. But they're all available on Amazon. If you want signed copies, you have to go to my website, click on contact me, send me an email. I then call you, get a credit card.
All right, what is that website? Tell us what that website is.
www.marcliebman.com.
Liebman, M-A-R-C, Liebman. And I got to tell you, you want a great story, you want a great book to enjoy if you're military, and especially if you're Vietnam, you're going to find out some things you didn't know about insertion, what some of the Navy SEALs did. Guess what? We were up in North Vietnam when nobody knew about it. Hey, you're listening to Jim Blythe and Captain Marc Liebman on Alliance for the Brave, talking about history, talking about where did we get started with the Navy, and this is all about Memorial Day. So when we come back to finish up and bring this ship into the port, we're going to talk about what does it mean to join the Navy today, and how important is it to put this into your career path. So we'll be right back after these words from all our partners. This is Alliance for the Brave. We're here for you. Send us a note on Facebook. Send us a note at allianceforthebrave.com. Mark, what I usually do in this, because we've only got about 3 or 4 minutes, is say to people, what would you say to a young man or woman who's considering the Navy? But if you want to say, hey, Mark, why did you join the Navy? Why don't I lead off with that? Okay? And then we're going to have a prayer at the end. So we're going to wrap this up. When I read...
It's non-denominational, I hope.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll make it that way.
Yeah, well, no, just because a lot of your listeners are not Christians, and because I'm sure, because I was stunned. I was at a Navy function, and we had a Muslim imam as a chaplain.
Wow. Well,
Times.
one of the things that I believe in prayer regardless, and I think I have had so many compliments. Matter of fact, of the people that were in the VA that were on this, I had one last week who was a psychologist down in the valley, and he sent me a letter and said, boy, I sure appreciated you doing that. So I want to be as non-controversial and positive. That's my thing. And see, this program we're talking about is so positive. So I would like to have just a second to mention Carry the Load, and that we also are remembering those that we lost.
I have 2 Carry the Load signs.
Do you?
Yeah, out in front of my yard. 2 guys are on the wall.
We've got the T-shirts. I had 12 killed in action with 163.
These are 2 guys I went through training command with. We were constantly seeing each other at different stages, and finally, we were all in the same class. Well, both these guys and I were in the same graduating class of 10 guys who got our wings.
Where'd you go to college?
A little college in Massachusetts.
Harvard?
No. Are you kidding?
Well, you're pretty damn sharp, even for a naval officer. I mean,
I was such. That's a long story. I was such a terrible student.
I went to SMU, Mark, and I did horrible. I hated SMU, but boy, let me tell you, when I got out of...
Yeah, you're a little more mature.
Oh, Lord. Well, boot camp. And I wanted to go in the Navy, and my grandfather and my father raised holy hell. I wanted to go in to the reserves, and they said not no, but hell no, because they were scared to death of Vietnam. And then I ended up with over 24 months of combat duty in Vietnam on carriers. And you know what? I never realized or never thought about the risk and the danger that we were in. I just enjoyed it. I enjoyed being part of that.
Yeah, I won't get into all the details, but I always wanted to be a military pilot. I mean, since I was like 10 years old, and so the Air Force wouldn't guarantee me flight training. And so I was talking to a Navy recruiter, and he says, "Yeah, if you go through this program, we'll guarantee you not only flight training, assuming you pass the medical physical test, but you'll get longevity for every year you're in college." I went, "Where do I sign?"
Well, let me ask you a question. Why did you go helicopter instead of fighter jock?
I was voluntold.
Oh, okay. We need you doing this.
Yeah, well, basically they took,
You're listening to Alliance for the Brave, honoring, serving, and empowering those who serve our great country in the line of duty. Today's program is presented by Gear Services Web Design. Learn more about our mission and how you can plug in with us at allianceforthebrave.com. Now, back to the conversation.
Well, welcome back. This is Jim Blythe with Captain Marc Liebman, U.S. Navy retired helicopter SAR pilot, operations pilot, commanding officer. What a great man. Great author. Go take a look at his books. Go to Amazon, look up Marc Liebman, L-E-I-B-M-A-N. L-I-E-B-M-A-N. Mark, why'd you join the Navy?
well, it's really simple. I'd wanted to be a military pilot for years. My dad was in the Air Force. I got to college. I wasn't bright enough to get into one of the service academies. And so the Navy offered two things. One, they would guarantee me flight training, assuming you passed the mental and physical tests. And the other thing is they would guarantee me a year longevity for each year in school. And I talked to my dad, and he says, "Go sign."
Yeah.
So there I was. When I graduated, I showed up in Pensacola. I had 4 years of longevity and a brand new ensign. I was making more money than the Naval Academy guys.
Hey, that's no bad deal. What would you say then to a young man or woman who's graduating from high school or graduating from college about getting a fast start in life? I wanted the Navy. I went into the Navy, and I think the Navy's educational systems and programs are the superior to all of the services. Now, I would be having my friends argue, but what would you say to a young man or woman?
I do the same thing. I'd say join the Navy. The main reason is because even as an enlisted man, they're going to figure out which skill set you would, and rate that you would be, and you get some wonderful training. You'll mature, and you go places that you would never go. Let's put it this way: you not buy a plane ticket to go to, but it's interesting, and the life is interesting. You get to sleep in a bed, even though you may have 20 of your closest friends with you in the same room, but that's okay, and the food is okay.
Hey, Mark, this has been so much fun. I'm going to have you come back, and we're going to talk more about that after I've read Raiders of the Scottish Coast. Go to Mark's books. You're going to really, really, really enjoy them. They're great gifts. They're great reads. I want to close with a prayer and just say thank you, Lord, for protecting our active duty military, especially the helicopter pilots. And thank you, Lord, for protecting those who are protecting us and keeping us safe. And thank you, Lord, for protecting and watching over our veterans as they contribute so much to our community. We are so thankful for all they do and what the first responders do and our medical responders. This we pray and say thank you so much, God, for all you do for our military services. Amen. Mark, this is a blessing to have you on board for Alliance for the Brave. If you want to share the Facebook post, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great, great history lesson we just had. Again, go to Marc, MarcLiebman.com, correct?
Correct, window.
And we want you to enjoy those books because I did. I want to share the experience that I had. And as I said, Mark, You're Josh Heyman. You were there. It isn't fiction. It's fiction with fact. I couldn't believe it because I was there.
Fiction, and that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
I can only imagine. Well, thank you for being on board with Alliance for the Brave. Give us a shout out. Give us a contact. We're here for you. Thank you for being part of this today. Thank you for Memorial Day. Thank you. We're carrying the load for men and women who we served with that are no longer with us. Thank you.